Welcome all to yet another episode of Eyes on Anime with your host, Muten Roby, and that is I. If you haven't guessed it, our episode we are doing this time is going to be featuring Yu Yu Hakusho. I feel like Yu Yu Hakusho is one of those series that is up there with Dragon Ball Z. A lot of people see it as like the alternate favorite before the big three, and this is one of them. At 112 episodes, 4 separate arcs, Yu Yu Hakusho is every bit as good as Dragon Ball Z, but in its own ways. 2 completely different series, but they have a lot of similarities, i.e. lots of fighting, lots of really cool characters, a little bit of transformations here and there. So it's got a little bit of what we've discussed previously, but in its own little form factor. So you know what? Let's take a quick look at what Yu Yu Hakusho is all about, some of the characters and whatnot, and our very fast, quick breakdown of this series. Looking into our quick breakdown of this series, Yu Yu Hakusho features Yusuke Urameshi, who ultimately ends up dying in the very first episode, and then through some spirit means ends up coming back as a spirit detective. His job as a spirit detective, you may ask? To find and defeat apparitions and demons that cross over into the human world. That's his whole thing. He eventually ends up tagging along, or gets people tagging along with him. 3 other individuals, one from which was his high school buddy named Kuwabara. The other 2 are, you guessed it, apparitions and demons that he at one point fought, and then they became friends. Once a foe, now friends. Typical anime trope. These 4 go on various adventures through arguably some of the greatest anime arc fight sections, probably of all time, in my opinion. You have that via the Dark Tournament section, which is about 40 to 50 episodes. Then that leads into the Chapter Black saga, which I think is also about 50 to 60 episodes. And then after that, you have the 3 Kings arc. So the very first arc being the Spirit Detective saga. So that rounds out all 4 of our sagas. Every single one hits with a different level of intensity, with a different level of suspense and thriller, and some as well. So ultimately, I hope that listening to this quick overview of Yu Yu Hakusho maybe sparks your interest just a little bit. Now, if you don't want to hear any types of spoilers or anything really too in-depth about the series, this is the spot when you want to, maybe click away. I say that because now we are about to go into our in-depth review of this series. Are you ready? I know I am. I love this series, and from start to finish, it is absolutely amazing. Like I said, 112 episodes spanning across 4 arcs. The very first arc, or saga if you will, starts off as the Spirit Detective saga, which I believe is 40 to maybe 50 episodes. They go through the first 10 episodes. I would say the first 10 episodes are kind of backstory that I feel is somewhat necessary to the story, helps fill in some of the characters as well, like why some of them are there, why some of them are doing what they're doing in the first place, why they're assisting, why they're not assisting, whatever it may be. The first 10 episodes is crucial. After the first 10 episodes is when the real fun starts. So if you can make it through the first 10 episodes, you're golden. And the first 10 episodes is great, but it's a lot more backstory, kind of, not filler, but backstory type of stuff. There's not a whole lot of action, not a whole lot of fights and whatnot going on. There are some, but they're not like super action-packed like what you see behind me here. And this is also in the Spirit Detective saga. So after, Yusuke, comes back to life, because like I said, very first episode, he perishes. Gets hit by a car, trying to save a kid. What a hero. That then moves him into this section where he has to fight these 3 demons who stole these 3 spirit tools that hold immeasurable power. There's a couple quick fights in there. You meet some characters in Hiei and Kurama, who you then find out become recurring characters later on. Hiei being probably one of the biggest character archetypes used today, like your Sasuke's and I mean, like any of your like dark family have just dark characters. Your families have just been wiped out. They're special in some way. All of that is based off of Hiei, and I'm so glad that he's in there because he is a great character. Meshes with all the other great characters in Yu Yu Hakusho. So once all these characters have been met and whatnot, that leads you to where we're at currently, right here. And the objective for our spirit detective and friends is to find this demon named Rando. Rando's objective is to collect this Master Genkai, her secret spirit wave technique. And this newly found spirit detective, Yusuke, with his friend Kuwabara, are tasked with beating this guy. Can't let him get this ability because he would be ultimately unstoppable at this point in the series. So they enter this tournament. There's multiple phases throughout this little tournament thing. There's a forced phase where it's kind of like a weeding out phase. If you're not strong enough, you're not even going to get through the forest. Then there's a one-on-one fight, but in complete pitch black darkness, which is pretty cool. So you see a couple of the fights. I think 3 total you see like little bits and pieces of. And then that moves on to, I guess you could say, the semifinals, where it's individual battles, as you can see here, in this marshy kind of land that helps increase their spirit energy, which allows them to do these special abilities and stuff like Yusuke's Spirit Gun or Kuwabara's Spirit Sword, which he's doing here. And, you know, based on how much spirit energy you have, depends on, you know, you can do this attack, this amount of times, whatever it may be. So obviously they're fighting Rando currently, Kuwabara and Yusuke. And then after this part, Yusuke ends up fighting Rando as well. It comes to this big climactic end where, you know, it's a hero's ending, if you will. It's very surprising how it ends, actually. I think you'll be shocked when you get to it. But yeah, helps bolster our heroes. This is essentially the training phase of the series. The end of the Spirit Detective saga, if you will, is what this part here is. Or this is the middle of the Spirit Detective saga. Sorry. There's another part that comes right after this. And that's the end. So after this whole thing takes place, Yusuke obviously ends up getting the training from Genkai. He gets the Spirit Wave training that this rando fella here was trying to ascertain. Yusuke ends up getting it through this grueling training. Now he's a tough guy. He's a bad guy. Like, not bad as in bad, but he's that guy now. He's real strong. This moves us into the last, like I said, the last part. If this is the middle, this is the end part of the Spirit Detective saga. And that leads us to where there's these insects infecting the planet. With these insects infecting the planet, you know, that leaves our Spirit Detective. He's got to get rid of these things somehow. I believe they're called the Makai insects, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, so Spirit Detective and friends, so that's Hiei, Kurama, and Kuwabara, they tag along. They have to go to this tower place to get this guy who's got a flute, and all of his henchmen are there. So they break into this tower. They do all this cool stuff. It's pretty sweet how they get in. Then they encounter their first enemy of these. I think they're called the 4 Saint Beasts. First up is Kurama. Kurama fights the first guy. I think his name is... I can't remember his name, but it's some guy made out of rock. It's an okay fight. Pretty cool. Shows a little bit of the abilities of some of the other characters that we haven't seen yet. The next fight is a pretty good one. It's Kuwabara versus Byakko. And Byakko's this giant white tiger who spits fire. It's absolutely awesome. He's got a lava lair. It's really, really cool. All the different fighting episodes and whatnot. Even the dialogue within it is pretty fun and just really, really sets the tone for the series. Then that leads into Hiei. He fights this ice dragon guy. It's ultimately really, really cool. It's a quicker fight because it's more technical. And Hiei is obviously a swordsman character. So out of swordsman characters, you're expecting, you know, quick, concise attacks that deal large amounts of damage, and that's exactly what you get out of Hiei. Absolutely love the fight, even though it's quick. Still a really, really good fight. And then that leads to Yusuke finally getting assistance from his pals, and he gets up to the final floor where he fights the mastermind guy. He shows off some of his training that he learned from Genkai because of this ordeal here, fighting Rando and whatnot. There's a couple of hiccups in his plan. The fight kind of goes his way, kind of doesn't at moments. It's like up and down, as you would expect from an anime, a shonen anime at that. Ultimately, obviously, our heroes come out on top after you see some really cool techniques from both Yusuke and the name of the main villain is eluding me at the moment. However, really, really cool villain. He employs lightning and like a multi-form technique where he splits himself. Really, really cool fight. A fairly long fight as well. And then ultimately that fight concludes, and that leads us into, in my opinion, the greatest tournament arc series of all time. The introductory portion of this starts off as Yusuke and his pal Kuwabara, Hiei. No, just Yusuke and Kuwabara. They show up to this place where they're notified that this young girl, her name is Yukina, she's being, mistreated by this guy. She's a demon, but when she cries, jewels come out of her face. So this guy's like, mistreating her and whatnot. So these jewels will come out of her. So they're sent to go break this up, and I guess they're doing all these other things like illegal gambling and this and that, and these are humans doing these things to a demon. So they go, Yusuke and Kuwabara make pretty quick work of the first few enemies that show up, but this is again the introductory portion of the Dark Tournament saga. They introduce at the very end the last bosses that these two fight, and it's a pretty difficult fight for Yusuke and Kuwabara. They actually only get one, to my recollection, one really good hit in on these guys, and it ends the whole thing. But they were getting pounded the whole time, and it's the guys they end up fighting their names are Older Toguro and Younger Toguro. Younger Toguro is very big and buff and muscular and strong and very cool with these shades, and he wears a dark green jacket. And his younger brother can like change and shapeshift his body and do all these weird things. He can become a sword or a shield or whatever it may be. So, needless to say, our hero, Yusuke Urameshi and Kuwabara, they end up thwarting this bad guy's plan. These are henchmen for this bad guy. And you end up noticing that at the end of this whole skirmish between, Yusuke, Toguro, and these guys, at the very, very end, when everything is resolved and everyone's left, Toguro and his brother get up. They're totally fine. And then Toguro mentions interest in fighting Yusuke again, which then leads us to fast forward a couple of weeks, I believe, maybe even a couple of months ahead in the timeline. Toguro ends up finding Yusuke in like the real world in just some building that's being constructed. Yusuke ends up going over there to meet him to kind of see, okay, what's up, homie? I beat you before, I'm gonna beat you again. And Toguro displays his actual strength. Like, not all of it, but way more than what he displayed the first time, Yusuke and Kuwabara fought him and his brother. And it sends fear into Yusuke for the first time. So he formally, that's his invitation. He's like, hey, you form a team of 4, or I think it's 5 people total. And then that team, you have to be at this dark tournament thing, or we're going to obliterate you and your family and everybody that is attached. The whole nine, we're going to get rid of it. You got to be there. The only human team invited to this dark tournament. Every other team is filled with demons. It is absolutely absurd. So these guys, Yusuke, Hiei, Kurama, Kuwabara, they have time to train and whatnot, get stronger. I think it's 6 months. I could be wrong on the timeline, but that's the amount of time they get to train for the dark tournament. And that's the introductory phase into the dark tournament. And boy, let me tell you about the dark, when we get into that, oh my gosh, here we go. Yusuke Urameshi shows up with this masked fighter after X amount of months. His other teammates, Hiei, Kuwabara, Hiei, Kuwabara, and Kurama, they end up showing up as well. There's this boat that picks them up, and they have to squabble on this boat. Mind you, Yusuke's still asleep. They've got to squabble on this boat. Only one team can actually get there. This is like a pre-qualifier, if you will. So they wipe the floor with these low-level demons, of course, because they are that good. And Yusuke didn't do anything. His teammates did everything. And, this boat takes them to where the actual tournament is going to be held. And then right when they get to the tournament stadium, they get shown to their locations and everything like that. And then essentially the fights get started quickly. And here we go. The most notable fight in this particular matchup being Yusuke, obviously the team leader, versus Team Rokuyakai's leader, Chu. They end up doing what's called a knife edge death match, which is awesome. First off, before that, they display awesome powers and visual abilities that you just love. Chu's abilities are awesome. You already know kind of Yusuke's abilities, but you see more of them. And then you get hit with the knife edge death match. Absolutely awesome. After that matchup, that puts Team Urameshi up against, I believe, Team Yuritogi, if I'm not mistaken. Essentially, this is a team where they're mind controlled. Every single one of them are being mind controlled by this corrupt doctor who essentially just wants to mutate people and make them stronger. Anyway, if I didn't mention at the beginning, the Dark Tournament, if you win it, you get a wish granted. I guess everyone on your team or something like that. Yeah, I think everyone on your team gets their wish granted, whatever it is. So that's what everyone's vying for, even though the human team didn't want to be there. Anyway, so they're fighting against this team that's being mind controlled. They're calculating their percentage chance of victory, this, that, and the third. Ultimately, our Team Urameshi ends up coming out on top. I think it's our team is even lessened because it's Team Urameshi, or it's the captain, Yusuke Urameshi, and then the masked fighter that they have on their team. But they end up handling these guys. Something happens to our other team members for some strange reason. Then that leads us to our next fight. This is our third round of fights. The third round of fights puts our team up against... I can't remember the team name. Team Ichigaki, maybe? Or maybe this is Team Yuritogi. I might have had these two mixed up. However, it puts Team Urameshi against... And this is all of these guys. I think these guys in these sage-looking outfits. They have cloaks and whatnot. They're cool-looking outfits, I guess. There's a couple pretty cool fights. There's an ice guy who shows up who's really, really cool. I like ice characters. He ends up fighting, I believe, Kurama. I could be wrong. Don't correct me on that. Or feel free to correct me on that. Hiei ends up fighting. Everyone ends up having pretty good fights in this round. Yusuke's fights the first guy. This guy's ability is sweating, which is disgusting. Anyway, pretty good fights. They're not as memorable, but they're still pretty good fights. I think Jin, the wind guy, this wind guy gets introduced, which he's pretty cool. He's got wind abilities. I think Yusuke also fights him. Ultimately, awesome. Then that leads to our fourth round of fights. I can't remember specifically who they fight in the fourth round. Fights might not be as memorable in the fourth round. I could probably look it up, but it's fine. Fourth round's pretty good, but what I'm really excited to talk about is the final round. We finally get Team Urameshi versus Team Toguro, which is what you see in the background. We see one of the fights. We see Hiei fighting Bui. You get not just in this specific fifth round, final round, do we get good backstory on our, antagonist characters. That also happens a lot in all of these other fights. A lot of these other characters are fully fleshed out. Well, not fully fleshed out, but they're fleshed out enough to where, they're characters you could like. Jin's a really, really cool character. He's fun and lighthearted, and he just likes to fight. And he's the fun, giggly version of Yusuke. They're the same but opposite in personality, if you will. Anyway, you finally get to, this fight. They do some backstory stuff on Bui, why he's fighting, this, that, and the third. It's Bui versus Hiei. Then you end up having Suzaku. Or is it Suzaku? Yeah, I believe it's Suzaku. I feel like that could be wrong, but he ends up fighting Kurama, which you see again some really it's much more of a technical fight, but it's a fairly long fight, and it's really good. You get older Toguro fighting Kuwabara, which is not as memorable of a fight, but you know, those Kuwabara fans out there, I'm a big Kuwabara fan. He gets the dub ultimately, which, you know, throughout the tournament, it kind of feels nice to finally see a clear, concise victory for Kuwabara. You'll understand what I mean when you get there. But through 5 rounds, a whole bunch of funny things happen in a lot of his fights. You'll see. So then, who am I missing? Mass Fighter doesn't end up fighting. So then they have a fill-in for both teams. Anyway, that then leads to Yusuke versus Toguro. Man, so some events end up happening leading up to this fight. So there's more conviction in this fight. Like, there's a lot of backstory that takes place between characters on our team, characters on the other team, this, that, and the third. It's the build-up is phenomenal. And I feel like the fight definitely answers the call of the build-up. Like, the climax that it reaches and the resolution at the end of it, I feel like is absolutely astounding. It's beautiful the way the fight between Toguro and Yusuke plays out, the meaning behind it, like everything. It's all absolutely amazing. I absolutely love this arc, especially this final fight. Some say that it lacks in some areas, but I feel like it touches, especially considering the length of the series. You know, you can't have like a 20 episode fight between Toguro and Yusuke. So what we get, I feel like, in the show is perfect. It's absolute perfection. They knock it out of the park. It's absolutely phenomenal. Couldn't ask for anything better. So at the end of this whole arc, you'll see how it all plays out when you watch it, between Yusuke and Toguro. Some transformations take place, other things happen, like everything is peak. It's amazing. Yusuke now realizes he's kind of like, I'm kind of that guy. Like, I'm really that guy now. Like, I beat Toguro. Like, this guy was super duper ridiculously strong. So he's walking around with that kind of a attitude, you know, kind of like nobody can kind of touch him. But shortly into this next saga arc, if you will, the Chapter Black saga, that confidence that Yusuke has gets squashed pretty quick. So right off the bat, you know, Yusuke finds some guys that kind of give off the vibe they're in a fight, blah, 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 blah. He goes and does his thing by himself, thinking, you know, I can do whatever. And then that sparks, you know, you don't see what happens, but that sparks, you know, his teammates. They have to go look for him because guess what? He got kidnapped. As strong as he is, he ends up getting kidnapped. Crazy, right? So he gets kidnapped, and his teammates, Hiei, Kuwabara, and Kurama, they go find him. They encounter these other enemies, if you will. They you know, do the little song and dance back and forth, blah 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 blah. Essentially, this ends up being like a learning lesson for all of these characters, if you will. Who we think is villains end up being, you know, friends. And then we end up seeing Yusuke. He's fine, but he ends up learning the lesson as well. No matter how strong physically you are, there could be someone with the power that outsmarts you, or, you know, a situation, maybe catch you, you know, at the end of a shift, whatever it may be. That's the lesson to be learned here. And again, this is like the introductory phase of the Chapter Black arc. So those, you know, foes who we thought are now friends, that leads us into meeting the actual villains. In these villains, it's these 7 characters that are all part of this group, led by this lead guy. His name's Sensui. And their main goal, if you will, is to open a portal between human world and demon world. So if I haven't mentioned before, this world is split up into 3 verses, essentially, or 3 worlds: human world, demon world, spirit world. Yusuke works for spirit world, so he's been to demon world, I think. Yeah, he's been to demon world before as well. So he's been in all 3. Anyway, so these demons, these 7 working on for this guy Sensui, their goal is to topple the establishment. They want to open a portal so demons can come and go as they please. And also, I didn't mention those characters that kidnapped Yusuke introduce a new power scaling system. So with this new power system, if you will, with this new power system introduces like these various very, very unique abilities that you haven't seen before in the series, but now we get to see, these various abilities. Like some guy can trap people in an aqua world. There's another guy who can put bullseyes on you. He can shoot literally anything. He can shoot a bus at you, just boop, and it will follow you until it hits you. Pretty cool ability. There's a various, again, so you typically would imagine our characters go through all of these 7 miscellaneous characters of this League of Villains, if you will, and they thwart not all of them, but majority of these characters one after the other. Some of which turn and become like a part of the team. Like you know how we do in shonen, we turn the friend or the foe into a friend. So some of them, not all of them. But this is even still kind of like a little bit of the introductory, because we learn that after a couple of our heroes do attack these guys and whatnot, we learn that this whole time we're thinking they're after Yusuke and whatnot, trying to get him to get defeated so they can open this portal. They don't have anything to worry about. But no, they got bigger plans. They're looking for someone. That someone being Kuwabara. Something about his power adds to their plan. I'm not going to ruin it, but something about it adds to it. So along the way of defeating these 7 henchmen guys that we thought, 7 Sensui's henchmen fellas, they end up kidnapping Kuwabara. Nuts. Yusuke goes after him in a rage. These guys are really like best friends. They're like besties for real. Yusuke goes after him, and through making friends with some of these guys, we learn the plot more in depth. We learn that there's a video out there called Chapter Black. If I'm not mistaken, that should be the name of it, Chapter Black. And it's got humans doing despicable things to not only humans, but also to demons from the demon world. Like bad gambling, they're tormenting them, they're torturing them. Like, oh, you name it, they're doing it. And it's a long video about the bad parts of humanity, if you will. And all these henchmen underneath, since we have seen this video, and they're with him to open and let the demons through so they can do what the humans have done to them. That's their plan. We also find out a location after they kidnap Kuwabara, where they're doing this at. And that leads us finally to like the meat and potatoes, like the big fight portion, if you will, of the Chapter Black arc. And boy, is it awesome. Let me tell you, since we didn't really show a whole lot until you get to this point, and I hadn't mentioned a whole lot of the other fights, primarily because, yeah, there are some, but they're not like super long drawn out fights, if you will. And I don't want to take away too much from the story, because some of those fights have bigger portions to do with the story. So fast forward a little bit back to where we were. We finally find the location. We prep, we plan. Our whole team is there. We got a couple extra people with us. We show up and we are ready to throw down. We're at this cave, and at the center of this cave is where it's pulsating, and this portal is going to open any moment now. So now with our heroes inside of this cave, they go through a couple of trials dealing with this one character. I believe his name is Game Man, I think. It's a small child, and his objective essentially is to stall, because again, they need time to open this portal. So it ends up being kind of sad, when you figure out like his whole part in this whole thing. It's a little sad when you get to it. But obviously our heroes and our protagonists, they get through this situation through Game Man, and they end up here. And as you can see, all of our heroes get separated, again, because Kuwabara was kidnapped. Then everyone else gets kidnapped into this separate dimension, if you will. And then it's left Yusuke Urameshi versus Sensui. And this is the big culmination fight. We learn along the way some secrets about Sensui. I don't want to relieve those secrets are about Sensui, but they're pretty awesome to the story, and it's so sick. Essentially, since after you find out these secrets about him, it makes this fight even more cool and also kind of crucial for, not only the human world, but also the demon world and the spirit world. Like, if this happens and they're victorious, that's bad news. There's going to be demons of A class all the way up to S class that can come through. That's another thing that gets mentioned a while back at the end of the Toguro arc or Dark Tournament arc, is the demon scaling. Toguro first scale was a rank or B rank demon. Sensui is a low S rank demon. So yeah, Sensui is like that guy. We also learned those 7 henchmen weren't like the 7 like real henchmen. Essentially, Sensui has 7 different personalities, each with their own sets of powers and each their own fighting style as well. Sensui is like one of my favorite villain characters because he's so complex. Like, there's so many different parts about him. Against one of my favorite protagonists, Yusuke. I think Yusuke is about it. He doesn't care who it is. He will fight anybody. He does not care. He mentioned in I think the first episode how he was willing to fight Koenma, the king of Demon World, or like the prince essentially. Anyway, this fight is epic. You see some really, 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 really cool abilities. You see really cool personalities. It ultimately concludes with a lot of events happening to where all of our heroes end up in Demon World for some reason. Right now, they're just in a cave in, regular human world. But they ultimately end up in Demon World through a whole strange course of events. Like, weird things happen to Yusuke. Some characters get power boosts. Like, it's nuts. This fight gets absolutely bonkers. You find out Yusuke's got like a demon grandfather when they get to Demon World. It's crazy. The fight ultimately culminates with, our heroes, Yusuke and the gang, winning the fight in Demon World, vanquishing Sensui. You'll see how it plays out. I'm simplifying, obviously. I don't want to spoil too much or lose the feeling for you. So the fight ends up culminating, and it ultimately leaves Yusuke with more questions than anything else. Like, that's ultimately what happens. And then that leads us into, you guessed it, the final arc. And the final arc is titled the Three Kings Saga, Three Kings arc. I've always called it the Demon King Tournament arc. Base it whatever you will. But most of it, essentially, if you didn't guess, is going to be a Demon King tournament. So you know what? Let's get into this final arc of Yu Yu Hakusho for our in-depth summary. So now that we're into the Demon King tournament, Three Kings tournament, or saga arc, if you will, it brings us, again, we just finished where Sensui's defeated, we were in the Demon World, we find out that Yusuke's great ancestral 1,000 years ago grandfather was a Demon King, essentially. The story gets kind of complex here, but I'm trying to give you a little bit of that pepper. So you find all this stuff out, it's this huge thing. Yusuke goes back, meets with this ancestral elder of his. They have, a little bit of a spat. They exchange blows, exchange words. And then, there's apparently 2 other guys just as strong as his ancestral grandfather. And Yusuke, for lack of a better term, ends up taking over for him, if you will. He ends up taking over for this guy, and these other 2 are like, okay, cool. Well, what's the plan gonna be? What's this new guy gonna do? Yusuke ends up announcing, hey, let's do a tournament. Instead of having 3 separate regions where we all do our own thing in each of those regions, let's kind of go for a democracy. Yusuke brings a democracy to the Demon World. That's what he does, through fighting. So he holds this tournament, and it's every demon for themselves. I don't remember what the term is for however, I think it's like 5 years, 10 years maybe, is how long they'll serve. And then they come back and they do the fight all over again. So it's this huge thing. All these demons find out about it. We find out that we thought only these 3 demons were ridiculously strong. Yusuke's grandfather, great whatever grandfather, these other two, Makuro, and I can't remember the other guy's name. We think that these guys are like the only strongest ones. But then we also find out with the announcement of the tournament and it being real, some other guys start coming out of the woodwork who are also ridiculously powerful. This arc is the power arc. There's absolute power in this arc. So everyone is strong in this. We're talking, I would say, probably small island level. Like if these characters wanted, they could destroy a small island, maybe even a medium-sized island, city, maybe a medium-sized city, small city, if that, gives you a better comparison. So they're strong. They're very destructive. So the prelims start, and like essentially the weak guys get weeded out here and there. And again, we have our returning cast. Everyone's back except Kuwabara. This is the Demon World Tournament here. No humans allowed, essentially. So we've got Hiei, Kurama. We've got those other kings, the other two, Makuro, and I can't remember the other guy's name, but this one guy's blind. He's super strong. And, of course, Yusuke. And all these other guys. So after we get through with the prelims, we get on to some of the more main character fights. We have some recurring characters from the Dark Tournament, some characters from... I feel like some of the characters... no, we don't get any characters from the Chapter Black arc. But we have recurring characters. As you can see, one of them behind me, his name is Jin. He was in the Dark Tournament. He's pretty cool. He's fighting one of these super strong guys. We get fights like that where we get our characters that have leveled up and trained and whatnot, prepared for this really awesome experience of fighting the chance to be the king of Demon World, essentially. So a lot of these characters had leveled up and they're here, to do their thing. So we see all these various fights. Yusuke does his thing. Ultimately, the Demon World Tournament comes to an end. We figure out who wins. I'll let you see that for yourself. Does Yusuke win? Does Hiei win? Does Kurama win? Like, who wins this thing? Like, it's that big of a deal. Like, they get to set the rules that all these demons have to abide by. No eating humans? Okay. Eating humans? Okay. So it's a big deal. And that rounds out our in-depth summary, essentially, right there. There's a couple more episodes after that, kind of like farewell episodes, kind of send-off episodes and whatnot. They're beautiful. They're awesome. Not as much fighting, obviously. It's a kind of a wind down, if you will. But it's beautiful. Ultimately, the series is absolutely phenomenal. I love it. Couldn't ask for anything more of this series within regard for a few things. And with that being said, that is going to take us right into the pros and cons of Yu Yu Hakusho. You know how we do here. We like to start off with cons. I only really have 1 to 2 cons. I like to do 3, typically 3 cons and 3 pros as well. My first con with Yu Yu Hakusho would be with the length of the series. I wish it was a little bit longer. 20, maybe 30 more episodes would have been perfect, I feel like. It is still perfect as is, but I feel like we could have got a little bit more story. It would have been nice to have things fleshed out a little bit more. But that's not like a huge ding against it. That's one con for me. My second con would be the final arc. I feel like the final arc, the Three Kings saga, Three Kings arc, kind of stands a little bit outside of the other 3. Like it just doesn't quite fit for me. I know some who love it, but me personally, it's good. I would say it's like a 7 for me, whereas everything else is like a 9.2, ranging to like a 9.5. That's like a 7.5 for me at best. But those are the only 2 cons that I have for the series. And I don't think those are too heavy of cons personally, especially when we get to the pros. Pro number 1, the utilization of characters is phenomenal. The fact that our main character Yusuke Urameshi gets a lot of shine and a lot of backstory and stuff like that, it's awesome. But the fact that Kuwabara, Hiei, Kurama, Jin, Genkai, you name it, these other characters have their own personalities, and like they fit into the story in this like their own little ways, and like they add something, even if it's just their character, like their personality to the story. A lot of it is just awesome, like their determination, tenacity, whatever it is that character brings. I absolutely love it, and they highlight that about characters in this series. So the character building in this show, absolutely phenomenal. Pro number 2 for me would be the intro. The intro for this song, the intro for this song, I listen to the intro every single time I rewatch Yu Yu Hakusho all the way through. I can listen to it all the way through every time. I don't every single time, because if I'm watching on my computer, I have a version without it, and I have, if I watch it on Crunchyroll, I do. Anyway, the intro, banger, 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 banger. One of the best, I would say arguably the best anime intro out of all of anime history. Period, point blank. Absolutely love it. Pro number 3, honestly, it's the story. I think the story, again, all the way up until the Three Kings saga, it got a little messy for me, but ultimately the story is very solid with this series. Granted, you're not expecting like this super expansive story, kind of like some of these other series, but for the time, and like you have to consider all of these things. Like the voice acting's good, like all of it. Well, the English dub voice acting is good. The story is really, really, really good. It's got moving moments. It's got like those really dig deep determination moments. And then you also have a different array of a non-typical style protagonist. Like it's the story, the characters, everything about this series is absolutely phenomenal. Lastly, this is going to take us into our ranking for this series. We're going to do our personal ranking and again our unbiased ranking as well. So my personal ranking of this series, drum roll please. Personal ranking is going to be Rinnegan rank. I love this series. Again, it's tied with me personally for my favorite anime of all time between Dragon Ball Z and Yu Yu Hakusho. I love it. I love the characters. I love everything about this series. It is phenomenal. My unbiased ranking of this series. This is, I guess, what you come for. This is what really matters. My unbiased ranking of this series is also going to be Rinnegan. I feel like this show doesn't suffer the same pitfalls that a lot of other shows suffer, because it's short, but they get the message across. There's not a lot of filler. It's just so well-rounded. I feel like anyone can pick this up, and if they give it at least till the 10th or starting the 11th episode, and I get that that's like a big ask for some people, but sometimes it takes that to build characters and whatnot. I feel like if you can get to the 10th, 11th episode of Yu Yu Hakusho, or the end of the 11th episode, I'll say, you will be absolutely hooked. I think you'll be hooked before that, but that's when like things really get cooking, like really, really get cooking. And when they get cooking, they don't stop. They kind of just keep going and going and going and going, and they just keep ramping up. So overall, again, my final score, unbiased score for Yu Yu Hakusho is going to be Rinnegan rank. It does everything I feel an anime should do for its fan base and just anyone who watches it. It's completely entertaining. It's immersive. It's everything that you need. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'll be back soon with another episode. But until then, I will catch you guys later.